How's it going, everybody? ShadowFX here with a mid-season Crusader build all about the Blessed Hammer. This build has really been the upset of the meta this season for Crusaders, even outshining the Lawn Bomb build. The build, of course, based off the Secret of the Light set, which buffs Blessed Hammer, along with the new Faithful Memory item buff, has really propelled this set and this build into new light. And honestly, the way this build has performed has just been so incredible to watch. Even though we're only a month into the season, you usually always see Lawn Bomb at the top at this point. Now, before we get into the gear and the skills, I do want to emphasize that this is a very glass cannon style build. You're going to have to be very careful about where you use certain skills, where you position yourself, or else you will get blown up very easily. So without further ado, here is our build presentation. Now, as we look at the skills, I want to remind everybody that this build is a top tier build, so a lot of these skills are going to be set in stone, but there will be a little leeway depending on where you are in your journey and where you want to be. And I'll explain all of that as we go through. Our first skill going to be our main damage skill, which will be Blessed Hammer with the Limitless rune. You can't have a Blessed Hammer build without the Blessed Hammer skill, and the Limitless rune will allow us to get more hammers when we hit something. The next skill will be Falling Sword, which synergizes with our set build and the buffed Faithful Memory item. The rune used by most of the top players will be Part the Clouds, as it gives a 2-second stun when you hit Falling Sword. That way you do have a little bit of leeway of not getting blown up. However, I have seen a few top tier builds using Rapid Descent, as it does help with the cooldown on Falling Sword. I've used both, it doesn't really matter, and you will be able to proc Hammer Jammers with the belt that we'll talk about in a minute. The next skill will be Laws of Valor with Unstoppable Force. This is basically mandatory, as it gives you extra attack speed, and when active it actually cuts your resource cost in half. Next will be Iron Skin with Steel Skin, once again mandatory, as it gives you 50% damage reduction for 7 seconds. This is extremely important when you're using Falling Sword into areas with a lot of danger, as it will help from getting blown up and with dot effects. The next skill will be Provoke with the Cleanse rune, and this is actually a change from the beginning of the season. Early in the season, especially when builds weren't fully fleshed out, people were using Too Scared to Run, as it helped you get in and out of mobs safely, as the mobs weren't able to chase you quite as far and as easily. And you can still use this if your Bane of the Trapped is not yet 25, as it will proc Bane of the Trapped. But once you get your build fleshed out a little more and you need that extra bit of survivability, you are going to want to switch to the Cleanse rune, as it gives you extra life on hit. And the last skill, of course, is Akarat's Champion with Prophet. I don't even really feel like I need to explain this. It's Akarat's Champion. Prophet gives you extra armor. There you go. Passive skills are pretty standard. We're going to be running Fervor because we want the attack speed, Indestructible because it gives you an extra res, and Finery because it gives you extra strength per gem. Now the last skill is Holy Cause. It gives you 10% extra damage and 1% of your holy damage done. Now I have seen a few top tier builds running Blunt, as it does give Blessed Hammer build an extra 20% damage. So essentially it's either do you want a full amount of damage or do you want a little bit of extra survivability. I'm a baddie, so I go with the extra survivability. Now I'm going to go over the gear, I'm going to go over what you need, and then I'm going to go back and talk about the stats you need, because there are a few variations among the top builds. As this is a non-Ring of Royal Grandeur build, you are going to need all 6 pieces of the Secret of the Light set. Very quickly, we'll go over the set bonuses. The 2 set essentially is the Zodiac Ring for Falling Sword and Provoke. The 4 set gives you damage reduction after you use Falling Sword, and the 6 set increases your Blessed Hammer damage by 1250 and Falling Sword by 500. This is easily one of the most straightforward sets, even though it is kind of a finicky set. Much like other sets, the 2 set bonus gives you utility, the 4 set gives you damage reduction, and the 6 set gives you damage. However, unlike some of the other builds, the 4 set damage reduction has to be procced. But because of the 2 set bonus and the Zodiac Ring we're going to use in the cube, you're pretty much going to have those cooldowns very quickly. As we said, you'll need the Secret Gloves, the Secret Shoulders, the Crown, the Vest, the Legs, and the Boots. Next, you'll want the Endless Walk set, which consists of the Traveler's Pledge and the Compass Rose. The Endless Walk set essentially will give you extra damage when you are allowed to stand still, and give you a ton of damage reduction when you are stutter stepping. And if you don't know what I mean by stutter stepping, it just means that you're attacking while still moving. That way you're still putting out damage, but you're moving and getting the damage reduction from the Endless Walk set. Next, you'll want Gabriel's Van braces. Van braces? Vom braces? Is it Vom? Vam? Whatever. You'll want these bracers. This is extremely essential when you have to kill small elite packs and when you have to kill the Rift Guardian, as it will give you a ton of wrath back. Now, your secondary ring is debatable, but you will have two main choices. You can either use the Unity or the Convention of Elements. Now, obviously, the Convention of Elements will give you a small time slot where you're going to do a ton of damage, but the Unity will also give you an extra amount of survivability to maybe not get blown up or to endure some of that dot damage. Now, of course, the Convention of Elements is a little easier to get as it's not quite as rare, and with a Unity, you have to have a well-rolled Unity plus a Unity for your follower, plus the extra follower item that allows them not to die. Therefore, most people will go with Convention of Elements to start off with, but the Unity is also a great addition for higher rifts. Now, like I said, this is heavily debated. Convention of Elements has always been that one ring that you really felt like you couldn't do without, but we are seeing a lot more top-level players using Unity, as it does help out with a little bit of survivability. Next, we're going to be using the Sacred Harness, which this is just to help proc the Faithful Memory, which we'll talk about in the cube later. For the weapon, you will be using Joanna's Argument, as it doubles the attack speed and damage of Blessed Hammer. Self-explanatory, let's move on. And for your shield, you will be using the Guard of Joanna. Once again, extra Blessed Hammer damage. Let's move on. Now, for the stats, you can do one of two things. You can go a typical route, which is just main stat plus crit damage and crit rate, or you can sacrifice a little bit of crit damage and crit rate and go for extra cooldown reduction on your items. But the build that I'm going to show you is my build. It is very traditional and it works for me. I was able to do a 72 rift pretty easily. Also, I just realized I said crit rate instead of crit chance, which I apologize. That comes from my many years of playing Cabal. For your gloves, you're going to want strength, crit damage, and crit chance. For the shoulders, you're going to want strength, cooldown reduction, and vitality. For the helm, you're going to want strength, socket, and crit chance. Chest, you're going to want strength, 3 sockets, and vitality. Belt, strength, vitality, resistance, and armor. That should be very easy to get on just about any belt. Pants, you'll want strength, 2 sockets, and vitality. For boots, you'll ideally want strength, vitality, and blessed hammer damage. For your amulet, ideally you'll want a socket, crit damage, crit chance, and holy damage. For your bracers, you're going to want strength, crit chance, and holy damage. For both of your rings, ideally you'll want a socket, crit damage, and crit chance. For your weapon, very important, you will want strength and a socket. You'll also want life on hit. This is very important as you're going to have a ton of hammers doing a ton of damage, and that means a lot of different sources to get life from. And for your shield, you'll want strength, crit chance, and vitality. Now, there's 2 things I want you to notice. Number 1 is the fact that I only have 2 ancients, and I pretty much ran a GR72 very easily without dying. Even though it is very glass cannony, you do have 2 potential revives plus the ability to reposition with Falling Sword. The second thing you'll notice is that I didn't specifically say armor or all resist on any of my items. That's simply because right now I'm not fully convinced that one is 100% better than the other. Ultimately, that's not an extremely important stat. It's much more important to have your cooldown reduction, your main stat, and your crit damage. And also, of course, sockets for your jewelry because you need legendary gems. Speaking of which, you will need a Bane of the Stricken, a Gogok of the Swiftness, and a Bane of the Trapped. Now, obviously, Trapped and Stricken are very typical. The Gogok of the Swiftness just allows you to get a little bit extra attack speed, dodge chance for survivability, and cooldown reduction. So even if you don't stack cooldown reduction on your gear, you do have multiple ways to reduce your cooldowns. Looking in the cube and the weapon slot, we are using the Faithful Memory, as it is pretty much what has propelled this build to the top. If you are able to stack the max amount from Faithful Memory, that means you're getting 600% extra damage to Blessed Hammer. That's a lot. Next, we're using Hammer Jammers. This is essentially while we're using the belt. It gives you 400% extra damage to any enemies that are blinded, immobilized, or stunned. Now, very important to say, if you do not have the Sacred Harness, then you will need to use Part the Clouds on Falling Sword, as that will be your only other way to proc your Hammer Jammers. But if you do have the Sacred Harness, then you can use Rapid Descent and you'll still proc your Hammer Jammers. And of course, the ring we're using in the cube is the Zodiac Ring, as I mean, you're using a ton of resource, you might as well use it. It'll get your cooldowns even lower. Looking at Paragon, you're essentially going to have a combined 25% movement speed and then dump the rest into strength. For offense, you're going to have crit chance, crit damage, and attack speed. Now, if you're wondering why you don't use cooldown reduction instead of attack speed essentially will give you extra damage and will help you proc your Zodiac Ring, your 2 set from your Seeker of the Light. Essentially, using it on attack speed gives you better returns than just the cooldown reduction. For the defense, you'll use Resist All and Armor first and second, then you'll want to use Life and Life Regen as your last 3. And for utility, you'll want to use Area Damage, Resource Cost, Life per hit, and then Gold Find at the end. And that's pretty much it, guys. I've been really impressed with this build. I was really excited to play the Crusader because of this build, and I was really hoping that it would propel itself to a higher level. And it's done that. Pretty much all of the top level runs right now have been Seeker of the Light. And as good as Lawn Bomb is, I'm kind of wondering if Seeker of the Light's not going to overtake it. When comparing it to the Lawn Bomb build, it is much easier to gear for. And if you're not using Convention of Elements, that means you don't really have a timing window that you have to hit. That's it, guys. I would really appreciate it if you left a comment and a like. Tell me if there's anything that you use with this build that I did not mention. Is there another version of this build that you like that I didn't mention? Please tell me. But with that being said, guys, I am Shadowfex. This has been the Blessed Hammer build, and I hope y'all have a wonderful day.